Jerry was asked at the Senior Bowl about Jason Garrett, and in the past, any question about Garrett's job would be met with overwhelming defense of Garrett. But we didn't hear that in his answer. And he hasn't gotten an extension yet. And I don't believe that he will. Because if he would have, he probably would have already gotten it. But he hasn't, meaning he's going in next year, the final year of his contract. This is a last chance for Jason Garrett. And that, more than anything else, should make Cowboys fans optimistic. Today is Friday, January 25th. This is the Cowboys Beat along CLNS Media. I'm Ari Temkin along with Patrick Conn. It's the Cowboys Beat with Ari and Conn. And Patrick, this should be, for the offseason, the most optimistic show we do, perhaps. And you know, it's interesting because I think there are a lot of Cowboys fans that have this overwhelming pessimism, you know, considering it appears as though they're going to go with some, you know, grouping of Kellen Moore and Doug Nussmeier and John Kitna and Jason Garrett as sort of the offensive designers and play callers. And so I think, you know, a lot of Cowboys fans are pessimistic about that. But I think there should be optimism in that. And the reason for that is because of what we've heard from Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones. You know, Jerry speaking at the Senior Bowl, Stephen similarly, and just speaking to, in a broad scope, Patrick, the most important pieces that we've kind of been talking about so far the last couple of weeks in terms of how this offense should be built. And that means the ability to be multiple, the ability to be diverse, the ability to leverage the skill set of Dak Prescott for the scheme. You know, these are all things that we saw, especially when you zero in on the Colts game and the Rams game this season. We saw sort of dynamic offensive schemes that leveraged their advantages over a defense as a specific game plan. I think that's what Frank Reich did for the Colts against the Cowboys, and same thing with Sean McVay for the Rams against the Cowboys. And it's something that I think that it didn't really matter who we were talking about for offensive coordinator. It was more about that, you know, the ability to be multiple, versatile, leverage Dak skill set, and sort of be, you know, an offense built for the modern NFL.
Yeah, I think the pessimism, as far as what I've been able to pick up on, is the fact that people don't like Kellen Moore because of the quarterback that he was. And I think that is not the way to go.
Misguided.
Yeah, it's misguided a little bit, because I will tell you, everybody that I've spoken with, you know, as far as league sources or people that are in that locker room, I've heard nothing but high praise for Kellen Moore, just for the football acumen that he has, the IQ. Some people, you know, I mean, Daniel Jeremiah is speaking highly of him. I mean, he thinks he's, you know, one of the hot young coaches and will be a head coach in likely the next 3 to 5 years. A guy that had just retired, became quarterback coach, and now he's likely offensive coordinator. I think that'll all be ironed out. I think he spoke on the actual titles and who's doing what. But you're right, there should be some optimism. I'm going to tell you the thing that I'm most enthusiastic about is John Kitna.
Why?
Obviously, he's been there. He has a lot of experience that he can draw from, you know, in dealing with the fame of being a NFL starting quarterback. Be able to speak on, you know, being a Dallas Cowboys quarterback. I mean, he did that for a time, and he even came back as an emergency guy. You know, and what a lot of people don't know is the rookie season when Dak was forced into being the starter because of injuries. John Kitna did work with Dak on the side, trying to get him up to speed. So it's a guy that he's very comfortable with, obviously. And from everything that we've heard, is Dak Prescott has had input as far as the offensive coordinator and and being comfortable with the guys. So obviously he has a lot of high praise that he's spoken about Kellen, so they feel comfortable with Kellen. And I don't think that they would bring on John Kitna as quarterback coach if Dak didn't have a good relationship with him as well.
You know, there was this narrative that formed at the beginning of the season, maybe towards the middle of the season, that like, why was Kellen Moore the quarterback's coach? I really think it started in the offseason, when Kellen Moore was named the quarterback's coach. And I think, you know, blame the media, because we sort of looked at this and thought, well, what has this guy done to deserve that position, right? Like, he's just Scott Linehan's guy. And it just didn't seem like the right move. And so I think like that idea carried over into season, and then you have people sort of reacting to what they saw in terms of Dak Prescott's play and thought, well, that's a direct byproduct of an inexperienced bad quarterback and Kellen Moore being the quarterback's coach. And I think like that just never went away, even though it seemed to be further and further from the truth. I mean, as you mentioned, you know, people you've spoken with, I mean, people inside that locker room, there is a tremendous amount of respect that Dak Prescott had and fostered with Kellen Moore. And, you know, I think firing Scott Linehan and elevating Kellen Moore should give you a pretty good indication that Kellen Moore is not an analog for Scott Linehan. You know, the idea that they've just replaced Scott Linehan with Scott Linehan, like, why would they do that? It makes no sense. I think they saw the intelligence of Kellen Moore, you know, the ability that he had as a potential offensive mind, and wanted to use that to their advantage. I mean, I look at a guy like Kellen Moore, who at one time was the leading, you know, or one of the top passers in the history of college football, okay? But his stature, I mean, he didn't have any physical attributes that lend itself to playing that position. So because he had such a prolific career at Boise State, and that should tell you that he's got so much between the ears, that he doesn't have the physical attributes to be a good quarterback, and he was, despite that, because of how intelligent he is and how good of a quarterback he was, you know, and how smart he is. And those are the types of guys that make good coaches. And when you look at the offense that Boise ran with Kellen Moore when Chris Peterson was there as the head coach, and then you sort of look at Kellen Moore's influences and, you know, and Linehan and Chris Peterson, and then you hear him talk and be interviewed, and you know, it just starts to make more and more sense. And then, you know, even if you're a Cowboys fan and you think this is just more of the same, it's Jason Garrett, it's Jason Garrett's offense, he's just presiding over it, and it's going to be more of the same. You know, you can't help but notice, hearing from Jerry and Steven, and I mean, again, the most important components that we wanted to hear of, you know, Steven's quote was, hey, we noticed that the 4 teams left were the top 4 teams in scoring offense, and we weren't one of them. Like that should be music to Cowboys fans' ears. When Jerry says, you know, we want to be flexible, we want to be multiple, we want to, you know, leverage Dak's skill sets and the skill set of the rest of our roster, like these are all of the things that seem so basic and simple and elementary, and yet it escaped the Cowboys. And it apparently escaped Scott Linehan. But even if you don't buy any of that, Jerry was asked at the Senior Bowl about Jason Garrett, and in the past, any question about Garrett's job would be met with overwhelming defense of Garrett. But we didn't hear that in his answer. And he hasn't gotten an extension yet. And I don't believe that he will. Because if he would have, he probably would have already gotten it, but he hasn't, meaning he's going in next year, the final year of his contract. And there are high expectations for this football team. And look, I do think that the Cowboys will give Dak Prescott an extension in this offseason, but if they don't, you know, that obviously puts even more of the onus on both of those guys to perform this season. But make no mistake about it, this is a last chance for Jason Garrett, and that, more than anything else, should make Cowboys fans optimistic.
You know, I think you hit the nail on the head there with Jason Garrett, and going into, you know, Jerry not being definitive and backing his head coach. The fact that he hasn't signed an extension. Here's kind of was my eye opening, is when the team decided they were going to do it in-house, not go to any external candidates. That said to me that Jason Garrett wasn't getting an extension, because why would you go outside and get you get an outside offensive coordinator to come in and run his system for one season only. What outside candidate would sign up for that with no future? Who would want to tie themselves to a coach who could be gone in a year? But I want to circle back real quick and go back to Kellen Moore. And you said a few things about there, the media and just the way fans felt about him. Like, how is this guy getting this job? Do you think that Dak Prescott did a better job this season as a quarterback going down the stretch?
Yes.
Would you attribute any of that to Kellen Moore?
Yes.
Okay, the fact that we saw last season, the last half of the season, under Wade Wilson as the quarterback coach, and you saw Dak Prescott fall off, and this season we saw him kind of become that guy that he was his rookie year, right?
Yeah.
Okay, do you know what Kellen Moore's job was his rookie year? And I mean Dak's rookie year. He was injured. Yes.
I was going to say IR.
Yeah, he was on IR, yes, but he actually had a job throughout the week. He did the advanced scouting of the next opponent for Dak Prescott. He was helping with their advanced scouting. That shows you his football acumen. That shows you how smart he is. And I think that people just want to brush that to a side. It's like there's this argument, and then you come with the counterpoint. So people just keep moving the goalpost.
Yeah.
So I think that we need to be a little less critical of Kellen Moore as a coach because of his pro career. And just, right now I think that there should be credit there to Kellen Moore. And I think that was a smart move for them. Now it's going to be interesting to see how they do with a 1-year deal essentially. Like I said, I like, Kellen being kind of, and he's at the Pro Bowl and installing the game plans as you can see through social media. And I love that. I love the fact that they already have John Kitna out there and he's working with the team. Nussmeier, and they're all going to be in this together. So, yeah, I think there's some optimism there. I think there should be a lot of optimism. They realized that offensively they were behind. And it just seemed like more and more as time went on, especially after the announcement came that Linehan would no longer be around. And you saw these reports from Jane Slater of NFL Network. The team had a sense of relief.
Yeah.
I mean, that red flag immediately. A sense of relief this guy was gone. And then you're hearing more guys say, well, if you weren't one of Linehan's guys, you weren't playing. And, so you had a mentality that was just counterproductive to anything. So it was almost like, we talked about this in weeks past. I don't think that you can have a team win in spite of their coach, consistently, but it seemed like that's what Cowboys were doing offensively.
Yeah.
Because when you hear those type of statements and then you look on the defensive side of the ball and everybody loved Chris Richard. And you don't have that same level of respect and love on the offensive side, there's going to be a disconnect. And I think that that's why that there were so many issues down the stretch. So it will be interesting. As we've talked about, guys, they have a lot of respect for Kellen, so maybe that's going to help offensively. As long as they don't get off that slow start, like we saw this last season, I don't think that's going to be as big of an issue because they're going to start out the season with Amari Cooper. There's going to be some things that they're going to have to work on and figure out this offseason, but I think it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, no, and I think your point about, they kind of succeeded despite their coaching, it's really well stated. And I think, like, to Dak's growth in this season, considering this is not an offense that was sort of catered to him, it was an offense that was, Scott Linehan's, a guy that wouldn't divorce himself from those tenets of that offense. It's more impressive that he was able to be successful down the stretch despite that. Although I do think, the rumblings that we started to talk about really towards that Giants game of Jason Garrett and Dak Prescott putting together the game plan, like, I'm willing to bet so was Doug Nussmeier and so was Kellen Moore. Like, I don't think the Cowboys are flying blind here. Like, I think, the success they had towards the end of the year on their offense, is a byproduct of the pieces that are now going to be in place in terms of their offense. Here's the thing that I kind of find interesting about this whole dynamic. We become glued to certain opinions, and they just, we sleep with them and we hold on to them and we won't let go of them, and they're constantly there. Like the defense, and the love for Chris Richard and that defense. And, so that maintained throughout the whole season, and yet despite the fact that defense gave up 25 points a game in the final 4 games, and then of course gave up, 30 points to the Rams, the defense was not nearly as good down the stretch of the season as it had been throughout the year, but everybody kept holding on to that. Like, it was still blaming the offense, the defense is great, despite the evidence that we saw to the contrary. And, I think the most important component to that was the reaction from Cowboys fans after week 3 of the Seattle game, when the Seahawks players were saying, well, we knew what call was coming before the snap, because we knew what plays were to call. And people were just up in arms, and they've got to fire everybody, and see, this is why the offense is so bad. And yet the same exact thing was said about the defense in the Rams game, and nobody said anything about that.
Yeah, but I also think that the opinion of the of the offense giving tells, and people are like, oh, we'll see, that's because it's Scott Linehan. That's called confirmation bias.
Yeah.
You already had this preconceived notion that, and I'm not saying that it was wrong by any means, but it's almost like, well, this fits my narrative, so I will go with it.
Yeah, totally.
An emphasis on teams picking up tails. Maybe the way that you're shifting your weight on certain, as far as the linemen go, or you can tell by where your linebackers lined up, or, vice versa. Totally. Or by if they go put Beasley in motion and line him up on the left side, we know this play is coming. That's just called advanced scouting. It happens across the league. But all of a sudden, because it's the Dallas Cowboys, it's a story.
Right.
And so when the Rams said it and everybody's like, oh, well, there was excuses everywhere. I don't think it was that big a deal.
No,
honestly.
I don't in either case. I just think it's funny how much, there was so much love for the defense, despite the fact that the defense over the course of the, end of the season didn't play as well as it, it did at the beginning of the year. And it was just people just don't adjust their opinions. They kind of stay the same way the whole year. And people are still like, why won't Chris Richard take over? And it's like, well, look, I'm not against Chris Richard becoming the head coach, but I also think, let's have realistic expectations that this defense wasn't as good the final month of the season as it had been the previous part.
And I think some of that had to do with the offense's inability to sustain drives. I mean, when you're going 3 and out, or you just can't move the ball, I can see some of that. But yeah, the defense didn't play well as a whole down the stretch. A lot of that has to do with the fact that this team can't create turnovers. And that's an issue on the back end. I know we love to make the jokes about Jeff Heath, but he was bad down the stretch.
Yeah.
So there's some issues there that they can clean up, but I think that the defense as a whole was a very positive. It's just that like you said, there was that narrative that people wanted to stick to, that the defense was great and the offense just can't do anything. The offense had the NFL's leading rusher after 15 games. So,
they could do something.
They obviously did do something. They may not have scored, and maybe that's a byproduct of Linehan's play calling, but the offense wasn't just being drug along by the defense as many people made it out to be.
That's Patrick Conn. I'm Ari Temkin. This is the Cowboys Beat on CLNS Media. Coming up in a moment, I want to get to DeMarcus Lawrence's comments, plus Cole Beasley's comments, and what they all mean in terms of their picture on the Cowboys of the future. But first, I've got to tell you about Roman. I've been talking about Get Roman now on this podcast for weeks. And look, guys are terrible at taking care of their health, whether it's a knee injury, bad back, or something worse. Guys are usually more comfortable rubbing some dirt on it than seeing a doctor, right? I'm guilty of it myself. Lingering pain, back pain, shoulder pain. It's just so much easier to just forget about it and not deal with it. and as opposed to going to see a doctor or doing something about it. And the same is very true for erectile dysfunction. Studies show 70% of guys who experience ED don't get treated for it. Thankfully, Roman created an easy way to get checked out by a doctor and get it treated for ED online. Roman is a one-stop shop where licensed U.S. physicians can diagnose ED and ship medications right to your door. With Roman, there are no waiting rooms, awkward face-to-face conversations, or uncomfortable trips to the pharmacy. You can handle everything discreetly online. All you have to do is visit GetRoman.com/CB, fill out a brief medical onboarding chat with a doctor, and get FDA-approved ED meds delivered to your door in discreet, unmarked packaging. It's that simple. You can do everything discreetly, see a doctor, talk to a doctor, have FDA-approved ED medications delivered to your door in discreet, unmarked packaging. Guys, go online, get checked by the doctor. Erectile dysfunction is a problem that guys don't tackle, but with Roman, it's so easy, too easy. So take care of it now. For a free online visit, go to GetRoman.com/CB. That's GetRoman.com/CB for a free online visit. GetRoman.com/CB. All right, so DeMarcus Lawrence, Patrick Conn, Ari Temkin, Cowboys beat CLNS Media. He said basically the Cowboys know where I'm at, so the ball is in their court. And I think that's in reference to where their talks were last season. Now Stephen Jones has since said, hey, we've got now another year of a pretty good performance to back up the previous year. And so, I mean, rightfully so. I think the Cowboys made the right move last offseason, not giving him that long-term extension. It was a gamble, but certainly, it was a guy in DeMarcus Lawrence that had underperformed up until last season, and then he put up a big-time season. So the Cowboys were like, all right, prove it. And he did. So my guess is DeMarcus Lawrence and his agents basically want him to become the highest-paid defensive player in the league, right? Like that's where it's at.
I think top two. I don't think he's going to get Khalil Mack money.
Right. I don't think he's going to get it. But I guess my question is, do you think he's asking for it?
If I had to guess, I would think so. I would think he was asking. When I looked at it, I mean, he's already this past season he was top 4 in defensive ends, edge rushers, as far as what they were making per season.
Wow.
And I think he's going to be in that top 2 range. So like Von Miller money. And I'm not saying the total contract. I'm talking about an annual of $20 million per.
Do you think the Cowboys are going to do it?
I think that he's going to get like a 5-year, $100 million contract. That's where I'm maybe 4 for 80. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at. But I think he's going to get 20 per because he has the performances to back it up. And honestly, it's kind of a desperation move because the Cowboys don't have another pass rusher. I mean, they have Randy Gregory who came on strong and another full off season with him back in the program and going into next season. Maybe they have something in Gregory. Maybe he can provide a little something more consistently.
I think you're right.
But they don't have a pass rusher.
I mean, going into last season, Jerry was talking about we need a war daddy, and then they found their war daddy, and they're not going to let their war daddy walk.
No.
I mean, I think if the Cowboys franchise tag him again, it would be very expensive. And, while some guys wouldn't want to be franchise tagged 2 consecutive years, I mean, the money that DeMarcus Lawrence would make would, I think,
It's fully guaranteed, though.
Yeah.
I mean,
he'd be fine with it, right? Like, it's different than Le'Veon Bell, who's getting paid, the average of the salaries for running backs. The defensive ends are a different story altogether, right? So,
yeah, it's a money 5 position. I mean, they're one of the top 5, where they should be one of the top 5 alongside your quarterback, your left tackle, your corner.
Right.
Those guys.
So I think the Cowboys don't want to franchise him. They want to get a long-term deal done. And they might have to overpay relative to, what we would expect him to get in order to do it. And I can't disagree with it. I mean, look, the guy played through an injury the entire season and played pretty well through the injury this entire season. So, I think the willingness for him to do that and then the ability for him to play and overcome the injury, that speaks pretty highly of him.
Mm-hmm.
How about Cole Beasley? Beasley was pretty outspoken on Twitter, basically saying, that he, like many others, are glad that Linehan's gone, but that really this the situation this season was more about, the front office wanting more guys to be featured. I guess, what are your thoughts overall on those comments, and what do you think Cole Beasley's future is?
Cole was talking a little bit about, people were saying about the money issue, and Cole's like, it's not even about money, it's about utilization. And I think he has a point, and you can go back and look and say, oh, well, he had 85 targets this year, I don't know what he's talking about, or he had 65 receptions, and it's like, no, there was just no consistency with it. And I don't know that I agree with the notion that the front office dictates who's going to get the ball. I think it was more the fact that he wasn't a Linehan guy. And so he wasn't a focal point in the offense. So I get that. But honestly, I don't see Cole Beasley as a Cowboy next year. You're talking about a wide receiver who's going to be 30, who's going to be, based on how he performs, he's going to be asking for money. And, he got the second contract. I just don't think that he's going to get a third. I mean, there's been this youth movement over the past few years with the Cowboys, and now they're going into the playoffs. They were the second youngest team in the NFL. They were the only team last 30 years without a starter over 30. And you got some guys that are coming up. Noah Brown's, he got healthy, so maybe he goes into the season he's healthy. Cedric Wilson's gonna be coming off IR, and there are so many wide receivers in this upcoming draft that I'm looking at it going, well, I know I got to pay Dak. I know I got to pay DeMarcus Lawrence. I know I got contracts coming up with Byron Jones and Amari Cooper, maybe Ezekiel Elliott. You got to figure out, you're going to have to cut somewhere. I mean, and that's, Cole Beasley came in as an undrafted free agent, so he made minimal. So you're talking about, we got Cedric, or we can go get this kid, Andy Isabella, or Penny Hart. I mean, there's so many slot receivers that they can go and look at in the draft. So it's going to be a cost issue, utilization issue, but, so that's why I'm looking at it going, I think Cole Beasley might be a Green Bay Packer or a Kansas City Chief or a New England Patriot.
Yep.
I mean, he's the archetype.
The thing that, my first thought on this just generally was, he's gone. I mean, this is a pattern we've seen now. Guy, maybe specific to receiver, like guy criticizes Cowboy, guys no longer with Cowboys. I mean, we saw this with Bryce Butler, Des Bryant, and Cole Beasley, and I mean, that's just scratching the surface in some of the, guys that have done this. But
Scott Linehan.
But he's gone, and this idea that they have to be more offensive oriented, more passing oriented. Like, I don't think he's as replaceable as maybe they think he is, or maybe even as other people think he is. I don't know. I guess, like, my initial thought on this was he's gone and they can't pay for it. But the more I thought about it, the more I'm like, I don't know that he's that easily replaceable. And especially when you think of building a dynamic pass offense, I mean, I just wouldn't want to see them subtract with the notion of, well, we can replace that guy, because I just don't know that. I mean, I think they had some good chemistry brewing between Dak and Cooper and Dak and Gallup, but they already have Beasley there. So if the money's close, you need every weapon you can have in order to be successful on the offensive side of the ball.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not to say that I think that he should go.
Right.
Or that I don't want him here. Because I'll be frank that he just does things that nobody else really does. I mean, you talk about the things that he and Amari can do, as far as the route running, the creating separation. When the play breaks down, I mean, that's the guys that they got to look for. Those two guys, they really know how to create and get loose. And when you need a first down,
right.
Cole Beasley's there. I mean, they've got to find a way to keep him involved, and that's the big deal. And without Scott Linehan, I think that might be
doable.
That might be doable, yeah, because we know that he wasn't a Scott guy, and he was vocal about these things, and I think even to the point, Dak got to the point where he was not a Scott guy, so to speak, because because you could talk about what happened with the play with Amari, or Amari's like, I don't like this play or whatever. And Dak's like, run the play, and then all of a sudden, I guess Dak thinks about it, looks at him, gives him a hand signal, and boom, touchdown, because they decided to change the route. So I even think that Dak got frustrated at some point down the stretch, and especially from the New York game on. I mean, it kind of felt like there was a lot of Jason Garrett influences there. And, you're hearing that Dak's in these meetings with the install meetings, trying to go over the game plans and, going with something that's comfortable with him. I mean, you saw it. I mean, there was an uptick in his performance and the way he's playing, and they're calling plays that are more along the line. So I think that, yeah, you're right. You need more. You're going to need receivers. You're going to need weapons. And what was the problem down the stretch? Well, the Cowboys were losing receivers because of injuries. I mean, you lose Hearns. Cole was hobbled.
Yeah.
But he was still gutting it out. I mean, the toughness in that kid is through the roof. And so I don't think he's easily replaceable. I think that they have to have the conversations of how do we replace him.
Right. And where are we spending the money if we're not going to spend it on him?
Exactly.
All right. Next week, we'll get really deep into the draft with the Senior Bowl and all the other components as we getting ready for the draft. With the Cowboys not having a first-round pick, there's still a lot of pieces they are going to need to fortify in this draft. So that's coming up next week. Make sure and check out Patrick Conn on Twitter at Draft Cowboys, doing fantastic work the entire offseason for WFAA. And, of course, me, I am at Ari Sports, ARI Sports, and I'll be doing a live stream every day on the Cowboys and Dallas sports in general. Facebook.com/Watch Phantom. And of course, the Cowboys Beat every week, dropping Friday mornings. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. And also, it's really important that you give us a rating, because a rating helps to prioritize us in that all important algorithm. So do us a favor and give us a rating. Other than that, for Patrick Conn, I'm Ari Temkin. We are out. Peace.